Welcome to the Addiction Solution Podcast. I'm Michelle Dunbar. Enjoy listening and watching as addiction experts Mark Sheeran and I cover controversial as well as helpful topics on addiction, how to move past it, and other related subjects. As two of the co-founders of the Freedom Model, Mark and I will give you a completely new perspective on the topics that matter to you. We will take to task the Recovery Society's lies and misinformation and replace them with facts, research, and the methods to move on from addiction struggles without 12-step meetings, rehabs, and the shackles of endless recovery. Let's escape the treatment and recovery trap together and learn. Hey everyone, welcome to the Addiction Solution. I'm Michelle Dunbar.
And I'm Mark Sheeran, and we co-wrote with Stephen Slate, The Freedom Model for Addictions, Escape the Treatment and Recovery Trap.
So first, we want to talk about our live upcoming Solution to Addiction workshops. It's such a tremendous value because it's about a 2-hour presentation with Mark and I, and throughout it, we're going to have question and answer sessions. So you get your questions answered. So it's kind of like a live coaching along with the workshop. And we have one specifically for substance use and general addictions. And then we have one for PMO and sex addiction, which could also, like, if you have other behavioral addictions, that might be the one to go to as well.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So those, we are going to have them every single week. So we're going to alternate between the substance use and the behavioral addictions every Tuesday at noontime. So go to thefreedommodel.org and you can see when those dates are.
That's right. Just click on the Solution to Addiction tabs and find those workshops. Also, remember, we have our Complete Addiction Solution Program, which is, we call it CASP. That's the acronym. And that's where you spend 2 days with Michelle and I. We've been doing a lot of them virtually now.
Yeah, with people from other countries.
Right. That don't want to fly in.
Yeah, that aren't going to fly into the US for 2 days. It's been going very, very well. Now, if you live in the US or even Canada, we have had people fly in for a couple days.
Or drive in.
Right. And typically we do them on Thursdays and Fridays. So you would drive or fly in on a Wednesday. We do it right in the hotel you're staying in. So we come to you. So, and we'll pick you up at the airport if you fly in and bring you to the hotel that's local to us.
It's a nice hotel too.
Yeah. And then we spend 2 full days with you. We do meals with you, everything. And then you would go home on a Saturday and that's Saturday. So it's really kind of a 4-day experience. But yeah, that has been great.
Yeah, people love that. And then of course we have our other coaching packages. So check all that out on the website. Let's get started we're going to talk about love today.
Love
and relationships, and only because both of our sessions that we just had, that Michelle had with somebody and that I had with somebody,
we're about relationships.
We're about relationships primarily,
like interpersonal and specifically romantic relationships.
And so I'm going to start off with some of the topics that I covered in my session this morning, actually. So let me adjust myself so I'm better into the microphone. So, people don't a lot of times understand that there's different styles of love, different levels of love. I don't know what the proper term is because it's kind of an amorphous thing, but this particular person, let me tell about their case a little bit. So they had a situation where he had learned what love was from 2 parents that really didn't have too much glue of love in the relationship. So his perspective on what constituted a relationship was very narrow and honestly a little bit depressing, because in his case, the parents had basically developed an understanding that they were going to stay together even though there wasn't much glue there. And they were very vocal about that, which was a little bit damaging not a little bit, but was pretty damaging to this person as a young man, where his parents were open about the fact that they didn't love each other that much. And so this confused him, obviously, and confused his worldview about love. Now, I'm gonna now talk about the fact that I had a very similar upbringing where my parents split up, and all of a sudden one day my mom announced to all us kids that she was not in love with my father and hadn't been for a long time, and just packed her shit and left. And I was 7 and my mom was gone. And so what that does is it really confuses a young man in my case, and then I'll let Michelle talk about her situation with her student. But in these types of situations, the word love is sort of tossed around. And I remember being young and I just didn't understand that they were happier apart. My parents were happier apart, but the effect that had on me as a young man, as a young child at that time, was they're saying it got better, but I lost a parent. Right. And so there's this weird dissonance that I developed where I assumed that love, if it existed, equaled some sort of pain. And I don't think I really understood that until many decades later when I met my wife, and I really understood what being in love and loving and love was all about. So being in love, loving, and love. So those things I did not understand until I met my wife, or until I met some women and dated and sort of figured my way through that process of being vulnerable, getting through some heartache, and in my journey of understanding what true love was. So I guess the way I want to frame this is it's really easy for people to toss around terms about love and not have a clue as to what that is if you grow up in circumstances that are really rough. And it's also equally confusing, or even more confusing, when you start to marry pain to love. That I have to pay a price for love in these relationships, and that it never occurs to you that maybe there's relationships where there doesn't need to be a great amount of pain attached to it, or a price to be paid, or these sorts of things. And it took me a long time to value myself enough to feel like I could be loved, and also to become loving and to be vulnerable and to be open and to communicate and do all these things. Took me a long time for me and my wife to figure all this out. So I'll end with that for now, and I'll define being in love, and loving in a minute, but I'll let Michelle talk about her situation.
I'm not sure if I talk, I'm going to, because he and I didn't talk about this really beforehand. He just was like, I think this is what I want to talk about today. So, because the coaching session that I had late last week, was different. It was different than this. And
so talk about that then.
Well,
that's cool.
It ends up being, I worked with a spouse of someone who is solving their drinking problem with the Freedom Model. And he's been doing the Freedom Model, or learning the Freedom Model, for a little over a year. And he's done really, really well. He's reduced his drinking to non-problematic levels. And in this particular case, there was real strife. There was real bad behavior with heavy drinking, prior to him enrolling in the Freedom Model online program and learning the Freedom Model. And it was witnessed by other people in the family. And so there was a lot of outside judgment thrown about that, how can you stay with this person that is abusive to you? And so yeah, I guess loving does come into this, because the primary theme of our coaching session was, well, I stay with him because I love him and I see value in this relationship. And it's not my first marriage, and I don't really want, and I'm older now. And so she's chosen to stay in spite of it causing problems with her children and her extended family is judging that choice, even though it's been a year since the bad behavior. And on the opposite side of it, though, the struggle is, well, I'm still punishing him, and I don't know why. I still don't trust him. I'm afraid that he's lying to me and hiding his drinking from me, which is another interesting topic. Because the question there is, well, are you worried about the alcohol consumption, or are you worried about the behavior, the bad behavior? And when it comes right down to it, it's the bad behavior. And she knows, she also has read the Freedom Model, and she knows drinking doesn't cause bad behavior, and it doesn't. And I had a little thing online with another one of our followers about that, because he definitely believes, he's still hanging on to that idea that when I drink, I behave differently. So in this particular relationship, what it really came down to was part of is the action part of loving. Okay. Because you can say, I love this person, I see value in this relationship, but I want to stay in it. But if you're not giving this person the space to change,
That's such a good point.
then maybe you're staying for a different reason, because that is part of loving. And I know that very well, because in my own relationship, I was somebody who would bring back the past into the present, which is no different, by the way, than going to AA meetings and talking about drinking that you haven't done in 20 years and rehashing all that shit. There's no point to it. There's no good outcome that's going to come from rehashing past hurts, past trauma. And, so I think for me, so what I said to her was, there's a reason you're doing this, just like drinking. There's a reason you're bringing the past up. There's a reason you're not trusting. This is a habit you've gotten into. What are those reasons? Figure out what they are and let them go. And I know for me, I can't say for her, but I know for me, it was the fear of letting myself be vulnerable again, and trusting again is a vulnerability. But if you're not willing to do that, then how much love is really there?
That's a great point. So I'm going to talk about 3 classes of love. And what Michelle was just talking about is, and I wrote them down, being loving is a class of love. It's a style of love. It's a type of love.
It's action.
Yeah, that's right. It's action, being loving. And to be loved and to love is part of that.
Yep.
So, so much of what people think, I'm going to talk from a male perspective, and I think this is true of women too, but I'm going to talk strictly from a male perspective, because that's primarily who I work with. There's a thing called being in love, and being in love is a funny thing. It is a bit of a more Western cultural ideal. I'm reading a book right now about a man who was captured by the Indians. And it talks about specifically about the Apaches and the Comanches in the middle of the 19th century, and what they went through, what he went through, and all the observations he made about their culture, which was really interesting, being that he was immersed in it, right? And he was captured by the Indians as a German white boy in Texas, and then was in their culture. And he talked about how they marry and the lack of emotion. Now, he didn't obviously talk about lack of emotion that way. He just described exactly what it was like. And he talked about sometimes where, for example, a squaw would have twins and she would kill one of the babies without a thought, because that's just, she would get angry and stomp out one of the babies and just leave it for the vultures yeah. And then move on, because they were very transient, they're moving around. They were a culture that moved continuously in raiding parties and things, and they couldn't have too many kids, because each squaw was responsible for that person. So my point of that is that you would think that there would be an automatic attachment and 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 that a mother would be loving. And it wasn't that they weren't loving. There was just realities in the culture. So when you talk about love as an action, you can turn it on and you can turn it off. And we see this throughout history. I mean, that's an extreme example, but where you would think that there would just be this a natural thing, but circumstances warrant that you can shut off and turn on the action of love. And we see that in wars. We see that in some of the worst things that people do, but we also see the acts of love to the most extreme in the other direction, incredible acts of kindness and heroism, right? And all this kind of thing where people do amazing acts of love. But being in love is something that I don't know if we have control over, because it's a passionate response of connection. And even in those cultures where when you read about these cultures in the past, or Aboriginal cultures where they have it really hard, there is passion there, and it causes a lot of problems in those places as well, because it goes against their customs and things like that sometimes. And there's rubs and people get murdered over these things, and so we see that throughout cultures, this sort of almost passive intrinsic passion where certain people connect with certain people, and it's unavoidable. You're going to feel that sensation. Now, that's not to say you have to act on it. It just means that exists in the human condition. And what a wonderful thing. So I always say that if you have a situation where you're passionately in love, you have that connection, your interests are somewhat aligned, your values are somewhat aligned, and you have learned to be loving and to be loved and to love, right? If you have that whole package, you're probably going to have a very successful life with that person. And because life is rough enough, you have that kind of package, you can probably weather just about any storm. But if you start taking some of those components out, it gets a little harder with each component being pulled out. If you don't have passion, but you are really loving, that can make up for the passion to a certain degree, but it can't replace it. There's always going to be this little piece that you say, gee, I wish I had that, right? But you can live with it. So we see this all over the place. So in this particular coaching session, we navigated through all the different types of love, and he was just blown away because we were able to figure out the parts that were really causing him problems. And he had a real deep fundamental need not to be vulnerable. And I could relate deeply with that because it caused me tremendous relationship problems for the same reason. I was very much a taker, but I could also be a beggar of love. And I would set myself up to beg for love and then be hurt. And then that would reinforce that I needed to guard my heart. And I'd go a long period by guarding my heart. And there was this waveform in my life that was very painful. Well, he had that same thing. And I've come to meet many people that live that way. So I just wanted to talk about the fact that I think sometimes people confuse passion with the word love and being loved and to be loved. There's different levels of these things. Some are action, some are feelings, and some is a code, a value of I'll be loving no matter what, for example, Then there's unconditional love. We have that a lot of times for our children where we can't see anything but the best in them, and we decide that that's what we're going to do. So yeah, there's a lot to love. But here's what I also want to say is that relationships that are successful aren't dependent on every one of those things being present. Sometimes if you just simply are a loving person, you can have a very successful life. And if you can accept a little bit of love, and it doesn't take much more than that in the human condition to find a good life. I want people to know that they don't have to be able to express passion perfectly. There are a lot of people that don't have that. They just don't want to. Because that action isn't something that they really want to get involved with. And so we talked a lot about that too. So yeah, there's a lot to this.
Well, and I think, it's some of the younger people that I've worked with in younger relationships. I think there's this idea of, what a perfect relationship looks like. And that it's all loving, it's all understanding, and especially, and we talked, this woman and I talked about, I mean, her relationship and compared to mine is young. They've been together like under 15 years, and I've been with my husband almost 35 years.
Long time.
And I think there's this idea, especially if you watch social media. Okay. You're scrolling through social media and there's all of this different information now. And if you even like one thing about relationships on there, all of a sudden you see all these different relationship coaches pop up and some of the little skits they do and stuff are really entertaining, like for real. And I follow a couple because I do this for a living. And so I want to see what everybody's saying. And I think sometimes they're helpful, but sometimes, okay, they're not helpful at all.
That's true.
Because you start measuring your relationship against these ideals.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the problem with relationships is you're each these autonomous, separate people. And I can tell you, my husband and I couldn't be any more different internally, in our skill sets and the way we communicate and it can't be, I mean, it's got to be so difficult to be in a relationship with somebody like me who does this for a living. It never occurred to me until within the last few years how difficult that might be, because I do have this set of ideals in my mind about how I want things to be and how I want him to be. Okay. And so this person and I in our coaching session she admitted to me, yeah, I have been scrolling through social media, measuring my relationship against all of this. And sometimes there's little questionnaires that say, if he's doing this, and this, you can't trust him. Right. And so now you're looking for reasons not to trust.
Yeah.
And what happens when you look for things?
You find them.
You see them.
Yeah.
So instead of flipping the script and saying, if he's doing this, and this, you can trust him. So that's part of being loving too, is giving people the benefit of the doubt and looking for the good. Because I can tell you, I wouldn't still be married if I didn't learn how to do that.
That is no small point. So we're going to see what we look for.
Yes.
What our perspective is. And the other thing is, if you grow up in a certain level of trauma, or you grow up in a certain level of distrust or self-hate, you're going to reflect and project that out.
Oh, what a great point.
And then you're going to get into this awful rhythm with the person you're close to, where they say, why do you see the worst in me? And then now you're both playing that game because those insecurities feed off each other. And holy shit, have I had relationships like that, because I came in a very broken person, a very, very, very empty person. I was never taught love, like an affection. So I had a huge high value with sex equals love. And I had trouble separating those things. So I didn't know how to be loving just as a non-sexual way. But I did know how to do things. Like I could do jobs. I could build you a house if you wanted. That I had no problem doing. And that's how I showed my love, or sex. But emotionally tied to somebody was a huge leap for me. And it took me decades to learn that. And luckily I had a very, very patient wife, and I was patient with her because she had some healing to do too. So we kind of healed together, which is very hard to do, by the way. That can be, it was fraught with all kinds of fighting and all kinds of insecurities and periods of near divorce and, all of that. But in the end, what saved us was we had a fundamental understanding that we wanted to be loving. And I don't even know, my wife's asked me many times, how the hell did you ever learn to be loving when you didn't have it? And I think there's a certain level of God in my life that I give credit to that for, because I don't know how I knew how to heal myself. And she helped me heal because she was patient enough. and vice versa. So being loving sometimes is riding storms when you hate each other. And people, I think what Michelle said, I think is really important too. And that is, you have this idealized idea of what a marriage should be from these weird standards on the internet. And it predates the internet. This shit's been going on forever.
It does. Yeah, well, we have romantic movies,
Yeah.
rom-coms, romantic comedies, right?
Yeah. And then
Hallmark movies.
and then I was talking to a lady one time, and I forget where it was. I got to think about where that was. I think I was at a friend's house, and she was an old lady, and she had been married at that point for about 55 years.
Oh, wow.
And offhandedly, we were sitting there. I remember where it was now. I remember this. This is in Niskayuna. And I was
You were
sitting there,
young then.
yeah. And I said, so what's the key to marriage? She goes, riding out when you hate each other. And I go, you've hated your husband? She goes, oh, there were entire years I couldn't stand the guy. and he was in the room making a cup of coffee. I'll never forget. He was the parents of some kid I was working with. And he looked over his shoulder and goes, yeah, the feeling was mutual, but we got through that shit, and they just kind of chuckled, and there he was with his coffee. And I could tell that they really, really loved each other. And I was like, holy shit, my parents never got past that. That's why they split up. I remember them fighting and hating each other, and they just couldn't ever get to the point where they're, and the guy turned around, and he came down, and he was having the cup of coffee. He goes, sometimes you just gotta just be patient, because you're just in a place that you're just not seeing it anymore, but you put the marriage ahead of the feeling. I never forgot that. And so that was, now that's not to say that if you're in an abusive, that we always have to say this.
We always have to qualify it, because there's going to be that one person that's like, you're saying I should stay with him when he, beats the crap out of me. No. God, no.
If you have a situation where somebody's, going crazy on drugs and is violent, and police are in your house every day, and you don't want the chaos in your life, it's fair to leave.
For sure.
Whatever. If you're in danger, that, I think that goes without saying.
It sure does.
And if you're sticking around in that type of insanity, then you have some things you have to question about yourself and your beliefs about love. Maybe you believe that love is attached to being abused. Yeah. I had some of that.
I did too.
I picked people that would abuse me. So I understand that as well. And that's not love. That's fear. And a self-image that's what you're worth. Am I worth only that which is abused? And the answer is, that's what I learned when I was young. I learned that love equals abuse. And we had a funny saying in our house that, with us Germans, because my parents were from Germany, you knew your parents loved you when you were crying. Yeah.
It's terrible.
It's so fucked up. But we would laugh about that, because we were all in so much pain. We had to laugh about it. It's the only way to deal with the bullshit. So you can carry a lot of that crap along with you.
But I want to qualify too, though, that a successful marriage takes both parties being willing to change for each other and with each other, being willing to grow together. Because if you're the one trying to make that effort by yourself, and the other person is unwilling, absolutely unwilling, and you're not happy with the way that person treats you, and they're just unwilling to listen to you or change, then it's probably not going to work. Right. There's no judgment. I judge no one. I judge no relationship. That's part of what we do. But even in my personal life, I've been through it all in my marriage. So I am in no position to decide what would make you happy.
Yeah.
And so that's the other part of this. And I don't think we can talk about relationships without talking about marriage counseling, to a certain extent. And I am a little biased against it. And I'm going to tell you why. I think there is just about no way possible that two people can be in a therapy session together with one therapist and that therapist not take a side.
Well, it's impossible. It's called triangulation.
Yeah.
There's numerically no way.
Nope.
There's numerically no way, because each party is sitting there hoping that the guy's on their side, the guy or the gal's on their
Yeah.
side.
Yeah.
And then biases jump in. It turns into a bit of a shit show. I don't work with families,
Yeah.
you know,
Like I won't take a couple. Somebody asked us recently if we
Yep.
would do that, even just for substance use.
Right.
And I'm like, no,
Yeah.
no, 2 people with 1. No, we work with people individually for a reason.
Because you can only fix yourself.
That's it.
So,
and you're
that-
going to be, and if you're in a romantic relationship with somebody, you're not going to be truthful. You're just not. Part of what you're talking about and saying to the therapist is for the benefit of the other person that's sitting there, right?
Yeah. It just turns into a mess. Back in the day, we tried all these things, decades ago, and it was,
We did.
I said, part of the research is figuring out what models work and what don't. And I can tell you that was never a successful model. I think that it takes a tremendous amount of pressure off when you just sit one-on-one with somebody who's reasonable. The other thing is, when we're coaching somebody on these things, it's almost always in the lens of a habit. They come to us usually with a problematic habit as the primary issue. And they usually are a primary issue. There's this big giant elephant in the room that they got to slay first. But then naturally, the tentacles of a relationship are a part of that habit.
Yes.
Because
always.
Because people are being affected by it. So it can be a bit of a complex thing. But we're very good at compartmentalizing, solving, compartmentalize, solve. And what's interesting about relationships is we really take a hands-off approach. I explain what love is. And then I just ask questions about the person's past. How did they grow up? Where did they come up with the ideas about relationships? What is their view about love? What is their view about sex? How is it connected to love? I ask all these questions, and then I say, is it possible that you've developed this? And I do a summary, and they go, holy shit. Yes, and then they go, but here's how it's different in theirs. And then they solve their problem on their own. Yeah. Because one thing I know is if people can understand who they are, where their values came from, what they value, how they think about the world, what they think about other people, and where all those ideas came from, then they can change them, modify them, challenge them, and come up with new conclusions. And love can mean different things to them. They can separate sex. Maybe that's been an unhealthy relationship to love, or maybe it's a controlling nature, or a manipulative nature, or a harmful nature, right? And so we're able to pull these things apart and say, well, is it possible that you could think differently about sex and love, and think differently about bringing up the past? Do you think it's possible that you could use terminology like, I'd like to be a team on this, rather than constantly be your enemy? I don't want to be your enemy anymore. Let me get on your side of the aisle. I'm really sorry that I've been your enemy, and things like that. Now, that's not for every relationship, but the point is there's all kinds of things to bring people back together and make a better relationship. And it's actually not that complex. It's only complex because you don't understand what's happening.
Right. It's very similar to solving a substance use problem. It's all about your beliefs and perspectives and what you're bringing into it, because ultimately you're autonomous in your own mind. And so your beliefs are going to skew your perceptions, and they're going to skew your expectations.
Yeah.
And a lot of times our expectations, we kind of manipulate things without even knowing it to make our expectations happen, both good and bad.
I want to jump in just really quick with PMO and drinking and drugging. So a lot of times we build a relationship to, for instance, our fantasies with PMO and with pornography, that sort of thing. And then that can replace a relationship, or it comes into competition with a relationship, right? And one of the real attributes or attractions to pornography is the fact that you can manipulate it and control it and feel like you're in a relationship during your fantasy session. But one of the base attractions to that is the fact that there's no sentient being on the other side that has a mind of its own. And so you have control.
Ooh,
And
that's a great point.
so control becomes a real big piece for some people's fetishes. And that's true with drugs. Let's say you're a drinker and you go to the hotel, or you're drinking in the garage and you're living in your fantasy with the drug, and you build this relationship with the drug. Well, it becomes in competition with your family and your other obligations, because there's only so many hours in the day. But you learn to covet that because you have control. You don't have control over your kids' thoughts. You don't have control over your wife and the way she wants to love you or not love you. And so it can be very frustrating. So you shift your gaze over to this bottle or drug or pornography or whatever your fetish is, because you have a real deep sense of control there. And that's very attractive. But in the end, it's wholly dissatisfying because it doesn't have a mind of its own. It can't play back.
Yeah.
And so you get to this place where control isn't as attractive as taking the chance with another sentient being, going through the muddy process of love and hurt and vulnerability and risk, emotional risk. But the upside is so much higher, because when the other sentient being voluntarily loves you back and you're not begging for it, striving for it, it just happens, it's way better than the other version.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'll end there.
I think that's a good way to tie it up.
All right. Remember, if you want information about our live upcoming workshops or about coaching, working with one of us or both of us, go to thefreedommodel.org, or you can always call us at 1-888-424-2626, or you can email us at info@thefreedommodel.org.
Also, we have a free app. Go to the App Store,
Yeah.
type in the Freedom Model, and yeah, it's cool.
Yep. And I think you can get the workshops, not the live ones. I don't think the live ones are available on the app. I think you actually have to go to the website for that, but you can get a pre-recorded versions of our workshops through the app.
All right, everybody. Have a great day.
Have a great week.